Hello everyone and welcome to LinkedIn Questions Hangout here on Google+. Lovely to have you on board tonight, and I'm going to be starting off by answering a few questions that I've received prior to tonight's session, and as other questions pop up, then I'll happily answer those as well. So, please forward your questions as soon as you're ready and I will answer those as well. So again, as I said, thanks for joining us. I've been doing a number of presentations on the topic of LinkedIn recently, up in Perth at the Reinvent Your Career Expo at Brisbane, over in Perth for the Career Development Association of Australia conference. I've got a number of sessions coming up on LinkedIn and Google Plus here in Melbourne this week and next week, doing a podcast with the Australian Business Women's Network, and also going to be talking or previously talked at the Melbourne SEO meetup with SEO techniques for LinkedIn. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff happening and lots of opportunities to hear me talk about the topic of LinkedIn, one of my favorite topics. And I guess the reason I appreciate LinkedIn so much is it really does give you an opportunity to showcase your skills and talents in an international context and enable people to find you and your capabilities wherever you are. As you would probably already know, by having a profile on LinkedIn, if somebody Googles your name, that's one of the things that's likely to turn up on the first page of search results. And also, a lot of people are now starting to add their LinkedIn URL to their business cards, to their email signatures, and even to their resumes. So lots of places that you can profile your details on LinkedIn. So let's start off with a few questions. And one of the questions that I receive most frequently is, who should I connect to? And I always say this really depends on your purpose. So if your purpose is to attract employment opportunities, well then obviously anybody who's related to that type of employment opportunities. If it's for business, if there's a particular type of client you're looking for, by all means do that. But the other thing that's really important is making sure that you attract the right people in the first place. And the good news is that LinkedIn has fantastic algorithms in place to eliminate the spammers. So if somebody starts being a nuisance, they fairly quickly get reported and then they get removed from LinkedIn. So even if you accidentally do connect to somebody that you really don't want to be known with, quite often LinkedIn will remove them before you do. And also, even if you do connect, you can remove them later and it doesn't send them a notification, Sue's removed you from her connections. It just cuts off the link. So there's nothing to be too anxious about there. And I had one particular client who was being stalked by her former employer who wanted her to stay with them and so on. And I said, look, I know this probably sounds a bit airy-fairy, but what I'm going to suggest there that you do is you stop thinking about that person. And look, don't ask me how it works, but I do know that this person stopped looking at her profile fairly soon after. So that was really interesting that we can almost imagine people coming and looking at our profile. So that was an interesting question that was posed. Another thing that I regularly get asked is, how much information should I provide on LinkedIn? And again, this really depends on your purpose. I did receive a request this week to help somebody with their profile who'd spent quite a lot of time in jail. And obviously, it's going to be a little bit tricky talking about that experience in the past, but you can still actually reflect, even if you were incarcerated, on the skills you learned. And apparently they need to work in kitchens and do other sorts of jobs and so on there. So there's even a way to massage that particular message so it's not all bad. And there's plenty of ways to present information in a very positive light. So it's not about lying, but it's about presenting that information in a slightly different way. And for instance, my career at Westpac was from 1982 up until 1994. And the amount of detail I have on my profile in that section is very brief, where the amount of detail I have on my more current positions is more comprehensive. So you can still put in those old jobs you've had in the past, but you don't necessarily have to put in quite as much detail with it as well. So that can make a difference. So as I said earlier, please pass on your questions. Just type them into the box or raise your hand, whatever it is that you do here on Google Hangouts, and I will get those questions answered. If you prefer, I'm also checking my emails, so just Sue Ellson, SUEELLSON at sueelson.com, and I will keep an eye on my inbox as well, so that if you find it easier just to email a question, I will make sure that I answer that one as well. So our next question is related to, how do I keep a backup of my profile? And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. You obviously need to keep a backup of two main things: your actual content on your profile, as well as all your connections. So to save all the content, you would go to the profile option on the top menu, and next to the big blue box there's a drop down arrow, and it says save your profile to PDF. And that's how you can keep a PDF soft copy of your profile. And it's a really good idea to do this before you make lots of changes, and also after you've made lots of changes, and also on a regular basis about every 90 days, just so that if you've been doing a few tweaks in between time, you've got a fairly current version of your profile backed up to your own computer or the cloud. The second part is backing up your connections, because in the unlikely event that LinkedIn no longer exists for whatever reason or gets hacked, which I presume it's probably prone to all sorts of hacks, and there's probably a whole bunch of people working on that to prevent difficulties, is exporting your connections. And to do that, you go to the connections menu on the top left, and you would click on the little cog. And then underneath that cog on the next screen is a little link that says Export LinkedIn Connections. And that is where you could go to export all your connections, save it as a Microsoft Outlook CSV file. And whether you've got either a PC or a Mac, you can then open that file in Excel, and you'll see the first name, last name, email address, current job title, and current company for all of your connections. So really great way to keep a backup of both the content by saving your profile to PDF, and your connections by exporting that Microsoft Outlook CSV file. So that's another cool one as well. And as I said, keep sending your questions through, and I'll make sure I get through those as well. Okay, next question is related to where is the best place to put the most important content. Now, I believe that most people are going to concentrate their efforts on your photograph, your headline, and your summary. So if we think about those particular things, does your photo represent how you want to be perceived? Or is it, a seductive photo taken at a party? I mean, if you want to be a party animal and run events, perhaps that's a good profile photo to have. But I guess in most cases, the whole aim of the photo is to represent you in a way that looks cool, related to your purpose. So I tend to prefer photos that focus on being able to see the face. That should be the main priority of the photo, not a distracting background or an ugly top that sort of stands out and is annoying to the eye every time your photo pops up. So, bear in mind looking at the camera, smiling with your teeth showing, and having a light coloured background is sort of a traditional look. But on the other hand, if you're a safety manager, having safety goggles, a hard hat, and a high visibility vest could be, a fantastic sort of profile photo to have, because it replicates where you want to go with your particular career direction. So the next thing is your headline, and just putting in your current job title, or worse, seeking opportunities. They're not good headlines, but if you include headlines that really incorporate those key words of what you want to be known for, what you want to be found for, what sort of business you're seeking, you've got 120 characters to really get your message across. And then your third component to really tell your story right now is your summary. And I think it's really important that you invite people to contact you immediately, whether that be by mobile phone or cell or email or Skype by appointment. Having that detail right up front gives people the opportunity, if they found you, to connect with you. I mean, and if you make your message really, really clear after that, you won't be hassled by people who just want to contact you to sell you something. You'll make it really clear, call me if you want this sort of information, or you want me to do this type of job. And as you would know, once people find something, they want to take action. And if your contact details are not there in your summary, then they might not be able to do that because they might not have a premium account where they can send an email, or they might not want to wait until they connect to you manually through LinkedIn and then contact you through your contact details that way. So having your contact details in that summary is really going to help, as well as in the other section called advice for contacting you. So if you have a particular message that you want to share, I'm interested in roles in X, Y, Z, A, B, C. If you put that in your summary and then you also put that in your advice for contacting you, again with your contact details, because the person is seeing that information for the second time, they're going to be much more interested in reading it and understanding it and interpreting that information. So that's going to be much easier for them to pick up those details. Okay, as I said, keep the questions coming through. Really great questions tonight, and lovely to have you on board. Okay, so moving right along, our next question is talking about, well, how should I write? I'm not a good writer and I feel uncomfortable writing a lot of information online. So the good news is with the LinkedIn, in my view, it's about short dot points. And obviously that's a lot easier to write than long sentences explaining everything in enormous detail. So for a lot of people, you need to think not just about what you've actually done, but you need to think about describing it in terms that people understand. So an example that I use regularly when I'm talking about LinkedIn is the grip test engineer. And so when I was working at an automotive company here in Australia, a lot of them are leaving the country, unfortunately. This guy was a grip test engineer, and every time I do this presentation, I ask people, who knows what a grip test engineer does? And most people have no clue what a grip test engineer does. But if we write grip test engineer on the LinkedIn profile and the person doesn't know what it is, then it's going to be very hard for that person to really make sense of whether that person's going to be right for the job. So if you go in and say, well, a grip test engineer makes sure that the car doesn't roll over, and it measures different aspects of the vehicle, including tyres, suspension, brakes, weight of the vehicle, aerodynamics, capabilities of the driver, the atmospheric conditions, the road conditions, etc., etc. You really have a huge range of keywords in there, and also the person reading that content is going to be able to say, well, look, you know, if this person could do that with cars, then they may also be able to do that with boats or some other moving object, or even just those analytical skills that they used as an engineer in that job, they could apply in another engineering-based job or another analytical job. So describing those transferable skills is really going to make a difference and make it much easier for somebody to understand what a grip test engineer does and what sort of skills might be transferable. So as another example, I was recently working with a guy who'd spent 30 years in the rail industry. And of course, you would think that somebody who just worked in rail might not be able to get a management job somewhere else, because they'd say, oh, well, you don't have any experience in our industry. You only ever worked in rail. So what we did is we changed his headline to include a lot of more generic terms of general management and project management and CEO, executive director, you know, all those kinds of words, change management and so on. And in the end, he was getting 4 phone calls a week. And these people were looking for him for senior executive roles. Now, if you've already had any exposure to an outplacement service, they usually give you a lot more support if you're at the senior executive level, because they are assuming that it's harder to get a senior executive role than it is to get a junior role. So the fact that this guy was getting 4 phone calls in a week is pretty impressive. And as it turns out, he had a few challenges through the interview process, but of course, you know, when you're getting 4 calls a week, there's a good chance to break out and get a good job, and that's exactly what he did. So even though his interview skills weren't 100%, still his LinkedIn profile carried him through, and that worked really, really well for him. So, you know, don't ever lose faith that you might not have all the expert skills that you absolutely need, but describing them in a productive way that people can understand when they read your profile is really going to help. And I often make the statement, if you don't tell, you can't sell. So if you don't write that information in, you can't imagine that the person knows that that information exists or that's what you're like. So it really is incumbent upon you to actually make sure that you tell those stories. Otherwise, that information is not going to be accessible. Okay, so please, by all means, keep the questions coming through. I'm also happy to do a screen share and show you my LinkedIn profile and answer any questions that way if you would like me to do a demonstration. If you don't know how to send a question on Google+, keep checking. You can send an email to Sue Ellson, SUEELLSON at sueellson.com, and I will answer your question from the email. Okay, so moving right along. There's a few people who've asked me how they can generate more traffic to their LinkedIn profile. And, you know, the first thing I say, well, make sure you've got a photo, because that's definitely going to make a huge increase, and also make sure your profile is completed. But there's another few little hacks that I like to recommend as well. And one of them is endorsing people that you know. And so I don't recommend that you endorse anybody for any skills that you don't know that they have, but it is a really good idea if you do know that they've got those skills to endorse them for it. So if you're connected to me and you think I know something about LinkedIn after listening to this webinar, then please endorse me for LinkedIn. But don't endorse me for the other skills, because I don't actually want to be known for the other skills. I just would like to be known at this part of my career for my expertise on LinkedIn. But if I spend a little bit of time endorsing the people I know for some of the skills that they have, what LinkedIn will do is reward my good behavior, and their computer program will actually put my name in front of my connections and say, oh, by the way, does Sue know about this? Does Sue know about that? So that's why it's a good idea every so often to write a few endorsements. Don't expect people to reply and say, oh, gee, thanks, you know, for endorsing me for LinkedIn or whatever it is the skill is, because a lot of us are too busy and we don't have time to do that. But, you know, and it's not, you're not required to, if you start endorsing people, to, or if they endorse you, to reply back, but it is nice if you've got the time to do it. But don't feel obligated if somebody endorses you for a skill, if you know you feel like you should endorse them for something. If you don't know that they've got that skill, there's absolutely no reason in my mind why you should endorse them for that skill. So there has been cases in the past where people who have been on have written recommendations on LinkedIn have actually had those recommendations brought up in court and been held accountable for them. So, you know, I only believe in being honest and making sure that you actually endorse them or recommend the skills that they have. So, for example, if your boss comes up to you and says, you know, look, Sue, can you please write a recommendation for me? And you think they're a shocking boss, you know, and you really don't enjoy working with them. If you want to write a recommendation, you can, but you would only recommend them on the basis of what they are good at. So this particular manager might be an extremely good person at making good decisions in a timely manner, and so then you can talk about those skills. But you might not want to talk about their HR skills or how they believe that you know, you perform in the job or anything. You know, you don't necessarily want to talk about their personal skills, but you can perhaps talk about some of their practical skills. You know, they have ability to analyze balance sheets really well, or, you know, something like that. You can focus on the strengths. All right, I've got another question come through. I've been told that as I only worked in one place for 30 years, that goes against me in my profile. Can you provide some tips as to how to overcome this one company syndrome? So, yeah, great question. And this happens for a lot of people. And also, I think it's important to remember that LinkedIn should not just be viewed as a summary of your past experience, but it's also a way to build the relationships with people, so that even when you leave that organization, people can still connect with you and find out, you know, what's happening. So particularly for people who, you know, all get retrenched all at the same time, if they all connect to one another on LinkedIn before the company closes its doors, it's a good way to maintain that relationship. But if you have worked in the one place for 30 years, I'm quite sure that you've done many different jobs. So rather than just put it all in one box and try and summarize 30 years of skills in 2,000 characters, break up that job title into different things. The other thing that you can do is you can write up some projects. And I would suggest that if you're wanting to specialise in some different areas in the future, that you summarise those different categories of interest. So if one of them is project management, and one of them is management, and one of them some technical skill, you could write up 3 projects that talked about those particular individual items that you could classify as a project. And what you can do when you describe that project is talk about how you might have liaised with other companies, worked with government departments, engaged with stakeholders or service suppliers, alliance partners, venture firms, whatever, consulting companies, so that people don't see you as just having had relations with the people, sitting on that floor of that building as such, but that you've actually had interactions and had some experience working with different organisations. I think it's also important to make sure that all components of your profile are completed. So particularly things like your interests. So, if you're a company guy and the only thing you're interested in is stamp collecting, and, you're going for a really heavily managerial role where you're working with a lot of staff, I mean, I wouldn't think a stamp collector, if that was their only interest, would be as interested in motivating and managing staff as somebody who was perhaps into some more active pursuits. So help people get a bit of an understanding of who you are by describing some of those other interests that you have. I think it's also a good idea to have a little bit of bling on your LinkedIn profile. So if you've got interests in particular topics, then you can link to videos, TEDx videos on topics, and you can demonstrate that you're a person of the world interested in other things, because those details are featured on your profile and give you some other examples of really great stuff that you've been involved with and that you might be passionate about. I think it's also important to connect to people outside of the organisation and in your industry. So if you think about, if you're in engineering, what other engineers are out there? And if you're in accounting, are you a member of the professional association? Because being a member of a professional association shows that you're really committed to growing and developing and being part of something bigger than yourself. So I think it's really good to show those interests in other things. And I'm just going to have a quick look at this person's profile on LinkedIn to see if I can give some more specific examples. If you'd like me to mention your name, do let me know. But otherwise, I'll just sneak into LinkedIn and just have a quick look and make some other recommendations on what I can see on your profile. Okay, so learning and performance improvement. Okay, all right. So another thing that I don't agree with is mentioning how many years experience you've got on your profile. Because as you can imagine, if a 25-year-old is looking at your profile for whatever reason, they're the gatekeeper between you and the new job opportunity, and you've mentioned 20 years of experience, they cannot relate to 20 years of experience when they're only 25. For a start, they've probably only been working, probably for a maximum of 7 years. So I leave out years of experience and I just talk about value. So different values that you would have would be learning and development, performance improvement, learning and development frameworks, maybe organisational development, continuous improvement. These could all be dot points and so on. Also, when you've had experience in one particular company, I'm just trying to work out whether you don't actually mention the name of the company. Oh no, you've just shuffled it. Now, the other thing is some people like shuffling their profile details around and putting their skills up the top and their summary further down. I don't like doing that. I don't recommend that for my clients. And the reason I don't recommend it is most people are used to seeing information in a certain order. And if you put it in a different order, they get a little bit confused. So that's also another important point. Now, the company that you mentioned that you work for, I've not actually heard of them. I'm really pleased that you've included a description of them on your profile, but I'd also like to suggest that you talk about tasks and achievements. Right, okay, so I can see, all right, so you've got a new job fairly recently and the other job was government related. Okay, and you have split that up into different sections. Terrific. All right. So because it is a government role, it's really important that you talk about different departments that you might have worked in and the names of those departments, as well as different organisations you may have liaised with, and show that you have lots of transferable skills. Also, you don't want to make it sound like you come from a government department. So using language that's interesting is really good. I notice here that you're also a member of ARI, and as a certified professional member of ARI, you can actually list that in your certifications section, not just your certificate for in training and assessment. And what that will do is you can put your membership number in as your license number, and that will give you the ARI logo on your profile. So any of the other people on this call, if you are a professional member of an association, pop that in your certification sections. It's really good to have that there. Now, you've also mentioned, this caller, is that you've started your own business recently, so that's really great, and well done. It's a brave person who, after they've been in a career for a lengthy period of time, goes into their own business. And so keep it up. Make sure that that business also has a company profile on LinkedIn, so that way you get a little logo next to your name on LinkedIn, and it links to your company page, because obviously you might be in a position where you want to grow that business and develop it as a saleable enterprise. And if you've got that company page, then that can go with the business when you sell that. I think it's also really important, when you've had a lengthy career in a particular area, to capitalise on that. So if you've got experience working in that particular government department, and then there's jobs in your area of expertise related to that, by all means, seek those out as your target clients in the first instance. So connecting with other people who were either part of that government department, or, aligned in that same area of specialty, the same industry, the same profession, they're really great people to connect to, because they're going to understand how you work and how you may be able to add value to their enterprises. And, don't consider it bad to have all that government experience. I'm very, very grateful for my 11 years of corporate experience, because it really taught me how big enterprises work. And I must admit, when I was at Westpac, I used to think, oh my goodness, they should improve this and they should improve that. And the irony was that when I got out into the marketplace in the real world, it was worse than the corporate organisation. And I guess the reason for that is the corporate organisation has access to consultants and advisors and some of the latest, they can afford to get some of that latest advice, whereas some of the smaller enterprises can't. So I was really shocked to find that out in the real world, it wasn't as advanced as I thought it might have been. But that said, I've also have to take a lot more responsibility for my own personal development. And I'm really, really grateful for various courses and meetup groups and that sort of thing that are around on current issue topics, because that's been a really cheap and affordable way for me to educate myself out here in the real world. Whereas obviously when I was part of Westpac, I could just apply to my manager to go after this training course or that training course and get the skills. But now I don't have that luxury, and I'm my own IT department. I've got to solve all my own IT problems. So, Google's my friend, and I'm regularly searching for answers. But yeah, go for it and be brave when you're out and about. So, as I said, any further questions, feel free to ask them on the Google Hangout. Otherwise, I'll keep going with some other regularly asked questions that I've got. A lot of people want to know how to track their return on investment with LinkedIn. If I'm going to spend all this time on LinkedIn, how am I going to say, well, was it worthwhile or was it not worthwhile? And if you have only recently created a LinkedIn profile, I definitely recommend that you aim to get a minimum of 60 connections, if not more. And also that if you want to classify yourself as in the job market or in the business market, then what you need to be able to do is be tracking at least 100 or more views per 90 days. Now, the spot where you can see this statistic keeps changing on LinkedIn, and sometimes it's on the homepage and sometimes it's not. If you can't see it on the homepage on the top when you log in, if you go to your profile page, it'll be on the right-hand side of your menu, and you'll see I've been viewed by so many people in the last so many days. And then if you click on that particular section, you will then see how many views you've had in the last 90 days. And I'm recommending that if you really want to be classified as active in the market, etc., you really need to have that up at around 100 or more views per 90 days. Now, some people would argue, look, if I only had 3 views and I got the business I wanted, that's fantastic. So yeah, that's all good. But if you are in the job market, obviously if you're getting 100 views, you've got a much better chance of getting somebody coming through and really responding to your profile, which I see as a pull strategy rather than a push strategy. So it's really fantastic for people who are a little bit introverted, who are a little bit embarrassed about contacting people. It's a nice little hack that I love sharing with people, and anybody who's heard me speak knows that I love reverse stalking. So I love seeing who's been looking at my profile, and I regularly check in on that because it tells me whether my profile's working the way I want it to work. But also, if you start looking at other people's profiles, there's a 30% chance that they will then look at you. And I reckon that's a pretty good odds because, in the old days of cold calling, they say only about 5% would ever get through and you ever get any success rate. So, again, for an introverted person, just start looking at a few people's profiles. You just never know what may come up. And if they look at your profile and they like the message, there's a good chance that some work could come out of that. Now, Samira sent through a question on, can you elaborate on what can be listed on the honours and awards section? So again, you really need to align this to your purpose. And if I think about honours and awards, it can be sort of minor things like Employee of the Month, I guess, but it can also be much more significant things. So I don't even know whether I put it on. I probably should have a quick look. I've received a medal from the Australian Human Resources Institute for services to the HR professions. So obviously in the Honours and Awards section, they ask you for your title and which job you were in at the time you got the award and who issued the award, and then obviously the date and the year and a description of it. Now, this is a really important section, I believe, for students, because quite often in the academic area at university, there's all sorts of awards for different things, and they're called fancy names after somebody who's, donated the such and such award for year 9 something or another, scholarly achievement, and so on. So if most of the general public wouldn't necessarily know about that award that was presented at that school or what it means. So in the description section, it's really important that you include a description of what that award is for. So if it's because you're the most outstanding geography student in the undergraduate department, well, write that, for goodness sake. Don't just say it's a geography award, because that doesn't necessarily mean anything to us. So, those sorts of things can be really good. You can also, particularly for the more well-known awards, you can mention that you were nominated. So a lot of people take great pride in the fact that they've been nominated for the Telstra Business Awards or something like that. So, anything that's really well known, if you're a nominee or you're a finalist, don't be embarrassed about putting that on there, because what it's basically saying is that you've been recognised by other people for skills and expertise in that area, and that's a really great thing to have. And so, don't be shy. If you say, oh, I was the best geography student, nobody else beat me, and I'm just the best, well, then I'd say that's probably not going to go down too well in the Australian context. But maybe go to America, they might like that format over there, but, you know, definitely wouldn't do that in Australia. Okay, so still looking for more questions. I'm still keeping an eye on my email inbox, and I'll probably wrap up in the next 5 to 10 minutes because anybody listening to this afterwards may be a little bit put off if they feel like they've got to listen to a webinar for an hour or more. So we'll stick it to the 45 minutes. So don't be shy. Please ask your question. This is what this forum is for. There's no such thing as a silly question. And believe you me, I've answered all sorts of questions in the past. And of course, it's pretty normal for me because I'm on the platform every day and a lot of people are not. So I've answered all sorts of things in the past and happy to do so again right now. All right. Now, how much time should you spend on LinkedIn? Now, I'm here to warn you folks that if you haven't got a fantastic profile that's completely updated with all your information, it's probably going to take about 10 hours to give it a really good red hot go and summarize your details appropriately. And if I think about the number of hours I've spent on mine, it's probably a lot more than that. But once that content is there, unless you're in a business development role or, you know, actively using LinkedIn to source leads for some sort of enterprise, or you're in the job search mode, I'd like to think that you wouldn't spend more than 15 minutes per week. But what you would need to decide is, what am I going to do in that 15 minutes per week? So are you going to endorse people? Are you going to write recommendations? Are you going to publish a post? Are you going to contribute to a group? Are you going to follow a company? This is particularly good if you're interested in working for a particular organisation. I know with the National Australia Bank, they prefer people who are already working, following that company on LinkedIn. So if you've got target organisations you'd love to have a relationship with, make sure you're following them on LinkedIn. You might decide to do some research and find a mentor or an alliance partner, or, you know, somebody else who may have a similar background, and make a time to catch up and have a discussion about, you know, what things that you could do to help one another. And I find that, you know, if you're polite and friendly about it, a lot of people are really interested in having a chat. And, you know, if you contact them and say, I've got this fabulous new product, I think you should buy it, obviously they're not going to be too interested in liaising with you. And don't say, oh, and by the way, I just thought I'd ask, you know, can you check my resume for free? Well, I'm going to say no. I'll tell you that right up front. So you can't expect people to give away their services free, but if you can sort of reach out to them and appeal to their higher nature and say, well, you know, look, I recognise by reading through your profile you're an expert in X, Y, and Z, and I'm really interested in this particular component. I'd love to have a chat with you about why, because of this, and you know, here's my views on it. You'll probably find that people are a lot more forthcoming and willing to share a little bit more information and, you know, build up the relationship. Because at the end of the day, you know, you don't ask somebody to marry you on the first date, so you can't sort of expect to do the same thing on LinkedIn. And I believe that before a relationship even gets started with somebody, you really need to have had at least 7 exchanges. So that could be emails, phone calls, meetings in person, you know, sharing little tips and so on and so forth. But, you know, you're going to need at least 7 exchanges before you can really get some value out of that. Okay, so I'm only going to take probably 2 more questions. So please make sure that if you want to ask your question, you do it now. So a next question that I've received is, how important is a profile rank and how is it used by recruiters who are looking for new employees? Well, I'm not a big, I don't know, how would you describe it? I don't really value profile rank as the #1 criteria when I'm searching for a candidate for something. When I was involved in the recruitment program for graduates at Westpac, a lot of people thought that they had to get straight A's in their degree to get a grad's position with Westpac. And what we actually looked at was the whole person. So they might have got straight A's, but, you know, if they weren't involved in any sports or extracurricular activities, we'd actually say that they're not really a good quality employee for our organisation. So if I'm looking at somebody for a particular role, it's really around, you know, do they have the value? Do they have the transferable skills? Is there stuff there that they can bring across? But also, you know, what is the whole picture? And so Profile Rank is obviously a little tool that LinkedIn has used. Perhaps the more sophisticated recruiters would look at that, but I had a lengthy discussion with a recruiter recently, and he's got the LinkedIn Recruiter service, and it took him about 6 weeks to find a candidate, because the problem was that candidate had the skills, but he didn't list them on his LinkedIn profile. So it wasn't until that guy rang him and found out that he had the skills that he was actually able to offer him the job. And, you know, it took him 6 weeks of ringing that person who referred to that person who referred to that person. And, you know, then of course he checked the LinkedIn profile and none of that data was there. So, you know, I think it's far more important to concentrate on the words that people are going to be looking for, making sure that they're throughout your profile more accurately than just saying, I need to get a high profile rank, and that's the only thing that's going to make me come up in search results. Another thing that does help your search results is paying for the premium membership, or utilizing the 1 month free premium when you're really needing to boost your results. And this was proven recently when I worked with one guy, and he was averaging 70 views over 120 days. And we updated his profile, and he joined up on LinkedIn Premium. And within 1 week, his average of number of views jumped to 120 over 90 days. So that means for all of those weeks, so he must have had, you know, hundreds more views within that week to boost his overall rating to 120 views per 90 days. So, you know, premium will increase your listing, and it will make you come up higher in search results, but you still have to have the keyword in there. If you don't have training in there and you're a trainer, well, then you're not going to come up. So, you know, the keyword has to be there. But if you've got trainer and training delivery and all those sorts of words and multiple times, and you're a premium, you are going to beat the other person who's only got those words a few times and doesn't have premium. So that's an important one there. And I will just qualify that statement by saying I'm not paid by LinkedIn. I'm completely independent of LinkedIn. But, you know, as with all things, if you pay for the premium, there are some benefits, but you need to know what those benefits are before you pay for it. And as it turns out with me, I'm generating plenty of business out of the free account, so I haven't used it yet. But if it gets to the point where I want to target a slightly different audience and I can't do that through my other activities, then I'll absolutely consider premium. And I will also consider it if, you know, by paying that amount, I actually generate a higher return on investment. You know, if I'm making more money out of it, then why wouldn't I pay for the premium service? That's obviously going to be of benefit to me. So just in closing, thank you for joining this LinkedIn Questions Hangout. If you would like to see more of these, please let me know. And also let me know what times of the day or night are going to suit you, either here in Australia or if you're from overseas, what sort of time frames you would need. I obviously take email questions on other days. So if you happen to just come up with an email question and there's not a LinkedIn Hangout happening, by all means, just shoot it through to sueellson@sueellson.com. And also, I've published a number of videos on my YouTube channel this week, so check those out as well. That can be really handy for either you or someone you know to learn a little bit more about LinkedIn and help them understand the basic principles. As you may already know with me, I do recommend a framework for putting your content in, because finding a job or finding work is very different to doing it. So that's what I teach when I work privately with individual clients. You can read more about me at sueellson.com, sueellson.com. You can look at my publications, which talks a lot about the different publications I've written, and also the presentations pages. So happy to be asked to come and do a presentation to your group, whether that be here in Melbourne or interstate. With a bit of notice, I can definitely do that. Probably heading off to New Zealand in November this year, and I've already been to Adelaide, Canberra, Perth and Brisbane this year, and it's only April, so we're doing really well. So thanks for your participation tonight. Thanks for all your fantastic questions, and enjoy the rest of your time after listening to this webinar. Bye for now.